The studio lights hummed, casting a familiar glow on the polished set. The host, a seasoned veteran of polite political discourse, nodded along, prepared for another predictable segment. No one anticipated the seismic shift that was about to occur. Melania Trump, poised and serene, was about to face a truth so brutal, so meticulously unearthed, that it would shatter the very foundation of her public image. This wasn't just a political hit, it was a personal unraveling, a bombshell she never saw coming. Melania poised, controlled, discussing family values or her legacy. Melania sat effortlessly, her posture impeccable, a study in quiet composure. She spoke in measured tones, discussing her enduring legacy, her work with children, the sanctity of family values. It was a familiar narrative, one she had meticulously cultivated over years in the public eye, a woman of grace, detached from the political fray, above the fray. The host guided the conversation, touching on her philanthropic endeavors, her contributions to the White House, reinforcing the image of a dignified private figure. The air was thick with the practiced politeness of Washington television. Jasmine, a guest panelist, interjects with a sharp, pointed question about integrity, not finances this time, but truthfulness of personal narratives. Then the host turned to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, seated on the opposite side of the panel. Jasmine, quiet for most of the interview, straightened in her chair. "It's refreshing to hear about values and integrity, Mrs. Trump," she began, her voice calm, almost conversational. "But I'm curious, when we speak of legacy, how much does the truthfulness of one's personal narrative factor into it?" The host blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Melania offered a small, dismissive smile. "I believe my life speaks for itself, Congresswoman," she replied smoothly, her voice a polished shield. "Authenticity is key." "Indeed," Jasmine countered, her gaze unwavering. "And sometimes authenticity requires transparency about uncomfortable truths, not just about finances, but about personal conduct, about history, about who we truly are when the cameras aren't rolling." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. The host fidgeted, sensing a departure from the script. Jasmine pulls out a single, thin document, not a stack, but something small and devastating. Melania chuckled, a short, forced sound. "I assure you my past is an open book," she stated, a hint of steel in her voice. "There are no secrets." Jasmine didn't argue. She simply reached down beside her chair, not for a thick folder, but for a slim, almost unassuming legal envelope. She pulled out a single, thin sheet of paper, carefully unfolded it, and laid it on the table between them. It wasn't a bank statement or a tax return. It was something far more personal, far more devastating, and Melania's eyes, fixed on that single sheet, widened almost imperceptibly. Flashback to the origin of this bombshell. It wasn't found in ledgers, but in hushed conversations. The document Jasmine held was just one piece of a puzzle, a quiet revelation born not from public records or leaked files, but from the hushed conversations of those who had once moved in Melania's orbit. This bombshell wasn't about numbers, it was about human lives, about whispers, silenced, and truths buried under layers of carefully constructed illusion. Jasmine's intern or a constituent approaches her with a deeply personal, disturbing story from a former aide or associate of Melania. Months earlier, tucked away in the back rows of a small town hall, meeting in her Texas district, a timid woman with weary eyes had approached Jasmine after everyone else had left. Her name was Anya, a former domestic worker from Slovenia who spoke in hushed tones of her time working for a high-profile family in New York years ago. Her story was not of grand theft or political intrigue, but of control, silence, and the quiet desperation of those without power. Anya spoke of friends, fellow Slovenian immigrants, who had been brought over on visas tied to specific employers, only to find themselves in exploitative situations, their passports held, their wages withheld. And the fear of speaking out, she said, was amplified by the looming presence of lawyers and discretionary funds used to make problems disappear. The story details alleged NDAs, threats, or exploitation of vulnerable individuals, e.g., immigrants brought over under false pretenses, then silenced. Initial skepticism from Jasmine's team, then a decision to investigate discreetly. Anya had heard rumors that Melania, back in her modeling days, had connections to an agency that quietly facilitated these arrangements, and that she herself had knowledge of how loose ends were tied up. Her story was vague, filled with second-hand accounts and fearful omissions, but the tremor in her voice, the genuine fear in her eyes, resonated with Jasmine. Her chief of staff, Kenny, was initially skeptical. "Congresswoman, this sounds like tabloid fodder," he'd warned. "Anonymous sources, decades-old rumors, it's too risky." But Jasmine remembered Anya's face, the quiet desperation. She thought about the power imbalance, the absolute control. "Kenny, if there's even a shred of truth to a powerful figure exploiting vulnerable people, especially immigrants who are often too scared to speak, we have to look discreetly." They began to search not for public records, but for patterns, for other former employees, for anyone who might have left the Trump orbit under unusual circumstances. It was painstaking work, like sifting through sand for a single grain of gold. The initial leads were dead ends, people who suddenly became unreachable, social media accounts that vanished, old news stories with suspiciously similar patterns of no comment from those involved. Finding a single, seemingly innocuous document that connects the dots, e.g., a witness statement from a forgotten lawsuit, or a leaked internal memo about discretionary funds for silencing. Then an email arrived, anonymous, untraceable. It contained a single attachment, a scanned page from a forgotten civil lawsuit filed in 2008. The plaintiff was a young woman from Eastern Europe, claiming wrongful dismissal and breach of contract. The defendant was a shell company Jasmine's team hadn't seen before, but its registered agent was the same obscure law firm that handled many of Donald Trump's smaller, less publicized transactions. And in the fine print of the settlement agreement, under a standard non-disclosure clause, was a small, almost invisible detail, a payment of $30,000, designated not as severance, but as discretionary funds for immediate relocation and non-disparagement. The suit had been dismissed with prejudice. It was a single thread, but it led directly to the very machinery Anya had whispered about. How a single incident reveals a broader, darker pattern. One isolated incident could be dismissed as a coincidence, but Jasmine and her team quickly realized that the single document was not an anomaly. It was a key that unlocked a much larger, darker pattern of control, a systematic approach to silencing and managing dissent that spanned decades. This was the true brutality of the bombshell, not a single misstep, but a calculated strategy. Jasmine's team begins to unearth more similar stories or corroborating details from different sources, indicating a systematic approach to reputation management through coercion. Troy Whitman, Jasmine's diligent intern, began cross-referencing names from the shell company's registry against old immigration records and obscure news articles. He found more former employees of various Trump enterprises, nannies, assistants, junior modeling agents, all from similar backgrounds, many with Eastern European ties. A disproportionate number of them had signed unusual, comprehensive NDAs, not just about business, but about their personal lives. Some had vanished from public view entirely after leaving their positions. "It's like a corporate witness protection program, but for staff they wanted to disappear," Troy observed, scrolling through a list of names, discovering links to other high-profile figures who used similar tactics. The common thread, a focus on maintaining a pristine public image at any cost, especially regarding personal conduct or origin stories, the increasing danger as they get closer to key witnesses. The deeper they delved, the more a chilling common thread emerged, a relentless, almost obsessive focus on maintaining a pristine public image, especially regarding personal conduct, relationships, and even origin stories. The NDAs weren't just about trade secrets, they were about personal truths. Jasmine remembered Melania's carefully curated narrative of her arrival in America, the strict adherence to a specific timeline. What if that timeline was not just embellished, but legally enforced? They uncovered links to other high-profile individuals, associates of the Trump family, who had used similar tactics to manage personal scandals. The pattern was systematic, almost a playbook. Identify a potential problem, offer a payment for silence, often disguised as severance or consulting fees, and enforce it with legal threats and social isolation. The stakes were rising as they tried to contact a former personal assistant who had publicly contradicted a detail in Melania's biography years ago. The assistant's phone number suddenly changed, her social media went dark. The quiet interference was back. A former, deeply reluctant but credible associate confirms the existence of a specific playbook for handling personal inconveniences. Then a breakthrough. Through a meticulously careful back channel, Jasmine's team secured a meeting with a former, deeply reluctant but credible associate who had worked for the Trump Organization in a senior legal capacity decades ago. Over a heavily encrypted video call, the associate spoke in clipped, nervous sentences, confirming the existence of a specific playbook for handling personal inconveniences. Anything that could tarnish the brand, especially anything that touched the family directly, it was handled discreetly and completely. The goal was always total deniability, plausible deniability. This wasn't just about money, it was about reputation, control, and the ruthless suppression of truth. Show the real-world impact of these tactics. The discovery of the playbook wasn't just a legal revelation, it was a stark, brutal reminder that behind every meticulously crafted image, every carefully worded denial, lay a human cost. This wasn't about abstract policy, it was about lives, dreams, and the quiet crushing of voices. Focus on one specific individual whose life was allegedly impacted by these suppression tactics. Among the numerous names and veiled stories, one stood out: Katerina. A woman in her early 50s now, living in relative obscurity in a small town in Ohio. Katerina had been a personal assistant to Melania in the late 90s, before her marriage to Donald Trump. Her name appeared briefly in a forgotten gossip column from 2002, referencing an alleged breach of confidence and a swift, decisive settlement. Anya, the initial constituent, had mentioned Katerina as someone who simply disappeared after a falling out, detailing their fear, their silence, their reasons for finally speaking out, perhaps years later, after seeing Jasmine stand up to Trump. The emotional weight of the stories. The moral dilemma for Jasmine. Exposing this could destroy lives. Jasmine's team reached out cautiously through a trusted intermediary. After weeks of no response, Katerina finally agreed to speak, but only via a secure, anonymous channel, her voice thin with a decades-long fear. She confirmed the story, an employment contract that included a vague, yet absolute, non-disparagement clause that extended indefinitely even after employment ceased. A single, minor infraction, a private comment made to a friend about a personal matter, had triggered an immediate, severe response. Lawyers, threats of deportation, despite her legal status, and then a hefty settlement payment tied to an even more restrictive NDA. "They told me," Katerina whispered, her voice barely audible, "that if I ever spoke a single word, they would make sure I had nothing, not my home, not my status, not my family's peace." Her fear was palpable, a chilling testament to the effectiveness of the playbook. She had lived in silent terror for over 2 decades. She only reached out after seeing Jasmine stand up to Donald Trump on live TV. "You weren't scared," Katerina said. "You looked like you just wanted the truth. I thought, maybe now it's different." Jasmine listened, the weight of Katerina's story settling heavily on her. Exposing this would confirm Melania's ruthlessness, but it would also drag Katerina back into a nightmare she had tried desperately to escape. Was the truth worth the potential collateral damage? This was not a legal judgment, it was a moral one. Jasmine decides that silence is complicity and the truth, no matter how brutal, serves a higher justice. The individual gives their reluctant blessing to share their story. Jasmine made her decision. Silence, she realized, was complicity. It allowed the brutality to continue unchecked. She spoke with Katerina again, laying out the full risks, the potential for renewed harassment, public scrutiny. Katerina listened, then, after a long pause, simply said, "If it means someone else won't have to live like I did, do it. Tell them." That single, brave permission sealed Jasmine's resolve. The truth, no matter how brutal, served a higher justice. The last piece of the puzzle that makes the bombshell undeniable. The anecdotal evidence, the whispers, the pattern of silence. It was compelling. But for a bombshell to truly detonate on live television, it needed one undeniable, irrefutable piece of evidence. A final confirmation that would make Melania's public narrative not just questionable, but a deliberate fabrication exposing the brutal truth of her calculated deception. Jasmine's team finds a seemingly innocuous public record or interview where Melania makes a statement that is directly contradicted by the new evidence. The key was found not in a secret dossier but in plain sight, a glossy magazine interview from 2005. It was one of Melania's early, high-profile features designed to introduce her to a broader American public. In it, she spoke eloquently about her journey to the US, emphasizing her strict adherence to immigration laws, her hard work, her independence. A specific quote stood out: "I would never put myself or my family in a compromising position. I came here through proper channels and I expect the same from everyone." The line was designed to project an image of impeccable legality and moral fortitude. But Jasmine now knew it was a carefully constructed lie. The document, not a criminal record but a signed declaration, an employment contract, or a legal settlement with a specific clause that exposes a hidden truth about her past or conduct, making her public narrative a deliberate deception. The internal debate in Jasmine's team about the personal nature of this hit. Kenny, initially hesitant about the personal nature of this investigation, now saw the strategic genius. This wasn't about a financial crime, but about a deep, fundamental hypocrisy. The document Jasmine chose to present was not a criminal record, but a specific clause from Katerina's non-disclosure agreement, a clause signed in 2002. It stated that Katerina acknowledges receipt of relocation assistance and financial consideration in exchange for complete silence regarding all personal and professional interactions with her employer and their associates, effective immediately upon signing, irrespective of any previous or future public statements or narratives provided by the employer or their representatives. This last phrase was crucial. It essentially bound Katerina to silence, even if Melania herself later told a different story publicly. It was a preemptive strike against the truth. It proved Melania was aware of a potential for contradictory narratives and had sought to legally preempt them. The internal debate among Jasmine's small team was intense. This wasn't just exposing a past deed, it was exposing the systematic suppression of truth. It was personal, it was brutal. Jasmine confirms her intention to use the information, knowing the personal nature will make the brutality even more visceral for Melania. "Are we sure this is the right move, Congresswoman?" Kenny asked, his voice etched with concern. "It's very personal. They'll go after you on a whole new level." Jasmine looked at the signed clause, then at the glossy magazine quote. "Kenny," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "the brutality isn't in what she did, it's in what she forced others to do to protect a lie. And it's in the audacity of her claiming authenticity while building an empire of silence. And this document shows she knew, and she prepared for it. That's the brutal truth." She knew the personal nature of this hit would make Melania's panic even more visceral. Back to the live interview. The moment of the bombshell. The studio in New York hummed with the same nervous energy as before. Melania Trump, calm and collected, prepared for another segment of graceful deflection. She had no idea the document Jasmine held was about to unravel her entire public persona. Melania still composed, confident in her ability to deflect. Melania sat across from Jasmine, a serene smile fixed on her face. She was talking about her vision for empowering women, her quiet strength, her role as a supportive wife. The host, Felix Roman, seemed content to let her glide through the interview. Melania exuded an aura of untouchable confidence, honed over decades of public appearances. She truly believed she could charm or dismiss any challenge. Jasmine presents the single document, quoting directly from it, a signed statement or legal document that directly refutes a widely accepted personal claim or public narrative of Melania's. The stunned silence from the host and panel. Melania's face changes, a genuine tremor of panic. Then Felix turned to Jasmine. "Congresswoman, your thoughts on Mrs. Trump's initiatives?" Jasmine nodded. "I commend anyone who seeks to empower women, Mrs. Trump," she began, her voice even. "But true empowerment begins with truth, and it means holding ourselves accountable for the narratives we present to the public, especially when they contradict what we've legally required others to keep silent about." Melania's serene smile faltered. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman," she said, a slight tremor in her voice. Jasmine didn't imply. She pulled out the single sheet of paper, the Katerina NDA clause. She didn't flash it, she simply held it. "This document, Mrs. Trump," Jasmine stated, her voice cutting through the studio air like a laser, "is a non-disclosure agreement signed by a former employee in 2002. It contains a very specific clause that requires complete silence about personal and professional interactions, irrespective of any previous or future public statements or narratives provided by you." Jasmine looked directly into the camera. "In essence, this document legally bound someone to silence, even if you later chose to tell a different story to the world." The host gasped audibly. The other panelists froze, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Melania's composure crumbled. Her eyes, usually so controlled, darted wildly between Jasmine, the document, and the host. A deep flush crept up her neck. Her hands, usually so still, began to tremble visibly. The uncharacteristic fumbling, the attempt to grab the document, the raw, unscripted panic on Melania's face, proving the bombshell hit its mark. That's a private matter," Melania stammered, her voice suddenly high-pitched and thin. She lunged slightly, an almost desperate, uncharacteristic movement, as if to snatch the paper from Jasmine's hand. Jasmine calmly pulled it back. "It became a public matter," Jasmine said, "the moment you built a public persona on a narrative that this document signed by your representatives seems designed to contradict. Your panic is all the verification we need." The host, stunned, simply stared. The raw, unscripted panic on Melania's face was undeniable, a brutal revelation for anyone watching. The immediate, visceral fallout from the bombshell. What happened in that studio wasn't just a revelation, it was a detonation. The single sheet of paper, the look of naked panic on Melania Trump's face, it immediately ignited a firestorm that swept across networks and social media like wildfire. This was the brutal aftershock, and no spin machine was prepared for its force. The network's scramble, social media eruption. In the control room, the chaos was immediate. Producers yelled, frantically waving hands, instructing camera operators to capture every flinch, every blink from Melania. The network's switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Within seconds, clips of the exchange were being uploaded, re-uploaded, and re-shared across every platform imaginable. Melania panics and Jasmine has receipts were trending before the segment even cut to commercial. The internet exploded. Melania's team releases a furious personal attack on Jasmine, dismissing the bombshell as a desperate, hateful smear. Threats against Jasmine escalate, becoming more personal and vitriolic. The segment goes hyper-viral. Melania's team was in full crisis mode. Within an hour of the segment ending, a furious, deeply personal statement was released, not just denying the claims, but directly attacking Jasmine Crockett. This is a desperate, hateful smear from a failing politician obsessed with character assassination. Mrs. Trump's life story is an inspiration, and this despicable attack is nothing more than a racist attempt to demean a successful woman. The accusation of racism was designed to deflect, to muddy the waters, to turn the conversation away from the document itself. Right-wing media outlets immediately picked up the narrative, amplifying the attack, painting Jasmine as a bitter, jealous antagonist. But the strategy backfired. The more they attacked, the more curious people became. The segment went hyper-viral, reaching audiences far beyond typical political junkies. And with the viral spread came a fresh wave of threats against Jasmine, not just generic political anger, but highly personal, misogynistic, and racist vitriol. Anonymous emails with disturbing imagery, direct messages filled with violent fantasies. Her security detail was immediately heightened, turning her daily life into a series of carefully planned movements. Despite the backlash, the bombshell resonates because it exposes a hidden truth about identity and image. But despite the coordinated backlash and escalating threats, the bombshell resonated with a profound, unsettling clarity. It wasn't just about a potential legal infraction, it was about the integrity of a carefully crafted identity. It exposed the brutal truth that behind the polished image lay a mechanism of control, and that was something the public, regardless of political affiliation, found impossible to ignore. The deeper impact of the bombshell, not just a scandal, but the unraveling of an image. The immediate firestorm eventually began to settle, but the true impact of Jasmine Crockett's bombshell wasn't found in the ephemeral headlines. It lay deeper in the quiet unraveling of an image, a public persona so meticulously constructed it had seemed unassailable. This was the true, brutal unmasking. Public reaction goes beyond partisan lines. People debate not just politics, but authenticity, truth, and the cost of maintaining a public facade. The public reaction transcended traditional partisan lines. Conversations erupted in unexpected places, college dorms, coffee shops, barbershops. People weren't just debating political allegiance, they were debating authenticity, truth versus narrative, and the profound cost of maintaining a public facade. The question wasn't just, is it true, but what does it mean if it is? And how much have we been misled? Media outlets, even typically friendly ones, are forced to address the contradictory evidence. Former associates of Melania start reconsidering their own silence. The discussion shifts from criminal past to truthfulness of character. Jasmine maintains her steady, factual stance amidst the chaos. Even media outlets typically friendly to the Trump orbit found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They couldn't simply ignore the document or Melania's uncharacteristic panic. They were forced to address the contradictory evidence, to analyze the specific wording of the NDA clause. The discussion shifted subtly but decisively, from a criminal past, which could be dismissed as politically motivated, to the more fundamental truthfulness of character and the integrity of one's public narrative. This was a far more damaging blow. Quietly, cautiously, former associates of Melania, who had signed similar agreements, began reconsidering their own silence. Some reached out to legal aid groups inquiring about their own NDAs. Others, emboldened by Jasmine's unwavering stance, made veiled comments to reporters. Jasmine, amidst the continued personal attacks and the chaos of the news cycle, remained steady. She didn't grandstand, she didn't engage in the mudslinging, she simply referred back to the document, to Katerina's bravery, to the pattern of suppression. Her consistency became her most powerful weapon against the manufactured outrage. The bombshell forces a public re-evaluation of Melania's persona and narrative, demonstrating the fragility of constructed images when confronted with unyielding facts. The bombshell had done its work. It didn't just create a scandal, it forced a profound public re-evaluation of Melania's entire persona. The image of the independent, graceful, and honest former First Lady, so carefully constructed over decades, was now exposed as fragile, built on a foundation of legally enforced silence. It was a brutal lesson in the power of unyielding facts against constructed images. The ultimate realization for Melania and the public. The headlines faded, the frenetic energy of the news cycle moved on to the next crisis. But for Melania Trump, and for the public that had believed her carefully crafted narrative, the core truth remained. This was not just a scandal that would blow over, it was the brutal, undeniable unraveling of an identity, a dismantling of control, and it was a nightmare she could never escape. Reiterate the power of truth and authenticity. The power of truth, when wielded by an authentic voice, proved far more potent than any carefully crafted PR strategy. It exposed not just a hidden past, but the insidious methods used to keep it hidden, and in doing so, it struck at the very heart of constructed power. Melania's attempts to regain control fail as the bombshell reverberates, shattering the carefully crafted illusion she had maintained for decades. The brutal truth isn't just about what was exposed, but what was destroyed, her narrative of independence, grace, and honesty. Melania Trump's attempts to regain control of her narrative were futile. Every statement, every public appearance, was now viewed through the lens of Jasmine Crockett's bombshell. Her serene composure, once a strength, now seemed like a mask. Her claims of independence and authenticity, once unquestioned, now rang hollow, directly contradicted by the brutal truth of the NDA clause and the stories of silenced individuals. The panic she displayed on live television wasn't just about a singular exposure. It was the dawning realization that the illusion she had maintained for decades was shattered irrevocably. The brutality wasn't just in the facts revealed, but in what was destroyed, her narrative of independence, of grace, of honesty. That narrative, the bedrock of her public identity, was now seen as a product of legal coercion and calculated suppression. It was the loss of control over her own story, a personal nightmare for someone who had meticulously curated every public image. Articulate how the brutality of the bombshell wasn't just in the facts revealed, but in the complete public dismantling of an entire constructed identity, a nightmare for someone whose public life was built on carefully managed appearances. Jasmine, with a single, brutal truth, exposed the very foundation of Melania's power, her perceived unassailability, and showed it to be a fragile illusion. It's not just Melania who panics, but the system that protected her. Final call to action. And this truly was the brutal bombshell. Jasmine Crockett, with a single, seemingly innocuous document and an unwavering voice, didn't just drop a bombshell. She exposed the very foundation of Melania Trump's power, her perceived unassailability, her carefully managed distance from scandal, and showed it to be a fragile illusion. Melania's panic wasn't just about a past revelation. It was the shattering of her carefully constructed identity, the nightmare of an authentic voice, armed with unyielding facts, dismantling a narrative built on privilege, secrecy, and the brutal suppression of others' truths. It wasn't just Melania who panicked. It was the system that protected her, now exposed for its reliance on silence. So, when the spotlight shines on uncomfortable truths and the powerful seek refuge in silence, what will you do? Will you accept the narrative presented, or will you dare to ask what's being hidden? If you believe the truth, however brutal, is worth unearthing, share this story. Demand accountability. Because the power of a single brutal truth can unravel even the most carefully constructed illusions,